everyone, and thank you for joining us again on the Seafood Matters. Today, we're looking at something that's been making headlines in the US. The Trump administration has repealed an EPA rule that previously classified carbon dioxide and several other greenhouse gases as a threat to public health. That sparked debate, but rather than get pulled into politics, I want to focus on what it could mean for seafood. We're hearing that changes to greenhouse gas regulations might have a knock on effect for mercury levels in fish, and that's something this industry has lived with for a long time. So the question is simple: is this a real measurable concern for seafood supply, or is it more of a long-term environmental discussion? To help us unpack that, I'm joined with Kevin McCay, Chief Operating Officer of Safe Catch. Kevin, thank you for joining us again. Can you start explaining what's actually changed and why it matters?
Well, I mean, ultimately, the U.S. for a while was, not necessarily setting the pace, but it was heavily influencing the pace of controlling greenhouse gases. The U.S. is one of the top three emitters of greenhouse gases in the world, along with India and China. And when we were, you know, um, at the time setting the standard for reducing our reliance on, um, the forms of mostly energy that produce those greenhouse gases. Other those other two other of the top three nations, China and India, were also following suit and reducing their mainly the reliance on coal burning power, and it was um, having a huge global impact. Um, Now that the U.S. is saying, we're not going to focus necessarily on these greenhouse gases. We're going to allow businesses to, not be regulated and do what they want, whatever they can do to make things cheaper. That also gives, China and India the opportunity to you know to follow suit. And so what what we do, ultimately is having a global impact. And because these are the three most, you know, greenhouse gas polluting countries on Earth, um, they, it has a very direct impact on our global oceans. So um, this is a very big concern. We already are seeing ocean temperatures warming because of greenhouse gases, global warming, and this is gonna, because these top three are gonna have less focus on regulating these greenhouse gases, that the temperature is going to continue to increase, and that's going to have a direct impact not only on the species, forcing them further and further north into colder waters, changing their patterns. It's going to also have a direct impact on mercury levels as well. Um, ultimately, the biggest direct impact is coal burning power plants. So if they're given free rein to release as much, of the pollution, and a big part of that is it's releasing mercury into the atmosphere that is then coming down in the oceans and through biomagnification, getting to the top of the food chain, and it's directly causing higher levels of mercury in the seafood. Um, and you can follow the trends in the mercury levels in the fish directly.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Really pretty interesting stuff. For listeners who aren't policy experts, can you explain exactly what the EPA rule has been repealed and what practical effect that has on emissions in the US?
I mean, I'm not necessarily a policy expert myself, but primarily what it was there was five main um, pollutants, gas emissions that were regulated during the Obama administration, and the EPA essentially said that we don't need to monitor those anymore, and gives U.S. businesses free rein to pollute, to expel as much of these gases as possible. Um, Primarily, the main three greenhouse gases that are causing the ocean temperature rise are carbon dioxide, methane, and your nitrogen oxides. Those are the three major pollutants there, with CO2 being the biggest one, obviously, carbon dioxide. But the practical effect is that businesses who are focused on their bottom line, if they don't have to worry about if they're the gases they're emitting, if they're essentially giving permission to expel as many gases as possible without free reign, if it's cheaper, they're going to take advantage of it. And so it is the practical effect is it's given U.S. businesses permission to pollute at higher levels than they have in 15 years. So
Yeah, and obviously this is with Trump doing this, and you mentioned the Obama regime previously. Do the obviously that's the Democrats and the Republicans, but
yeah,
are they politically involved that it would the governments who's ever in power would change that thing?
I think so. Because again, I think that this current administration, the Trump administration, has tried to form itself as a champion of business, and so they're going to say, you know, we're going to deregulate, we're going to allow these businesses to run their businesses cheaper, but at a real cost to the rest of us, a real cost to the world, to the seafood industry, to my children. So that there's while there's a short-term view, and that's what this administration has, of making these businesses, you know, it cheaper to run their businesses. The cost to the rest of our society is exponential, and I think that you know the difference between the Democrats and Republicans is how they look at that. The Republicans, in my view, have a very um, short-term viewpoint. They want to make their money now, or the Democrats realize that this has a much more expensive effect on all of us, and they take a look at the long-term effects. And so I think that's the easiest way to sum it up, really.
Yeah, and of course, as always, wherever it is in the world, the worst thing we can do is take politics into it.
Yeah, exactly. But again, it does have a real impact on, this is a show about seafood, and it does have a very direct impact
Yeah.
on our seafood, on the industry, and on the health of seafood. So
Uh-huh. Does repealing the rule immediately increase greenhouse gas emissions, or does it simply remove regulatory constraint?
I would say yes, it immediately increases them because, these companies, again, they're going to do what is best for their bottom line, and what's best for their bottom line is to not worry about to not spend the extra money to put scrubbers on coal power plants. They're not gonna spend the extra care to research how much their pollutants they're emitting. So they're essentially given the green light to cut all those costs, and that's going to lead to more pollution. And um, they're not, unfortunately, they're not going to do what's right. They're going to do what's best for their bottom line, and so it is immediately going to cause an increase in greenhouse gas emissions. Um, and yeah, those companies are going to take advantage.
Yeah. What is the timeline here? Are we talking short-term changes or long-term cumulative?
I say both.
Oh,
Like
oh,
I
sorry,
said,
cumulative impacts, I meant.
yeah,
Okay.
I would say both. Your short term, you're going to emit more, specifically the coal burning power plants are going to emit more toxic metals, mercury into the environment because they can, and that's going to very quickly bioaccumulate up the food chain. You're also going to have those long term cumulative effects or impacts because over time the oceans are going to warm, and as they get warmer, it causes it actually deoxygenates the water. Water is less able to hold oxygen as it gets warmer. So there's less oxygen in the waters. Fish need to consume more nutrients to metabolize and grow. So they're going to be um, they're going to be smaller, but they're also going to have to eat more. And in turn, by eating more, it's just going to cause the bioaccumulation of that mercury. That's now more of that in the environment is going to accelerate, and you're going to have higher mercury levels in seafood.
Yeah. Help me understand the mechanism. How does increased CO2 or greenhouse gases deregulations translate into higher mercury levels in seafood?
Well, yeah, I think that there again is a very direct um, translation. Direct translation being that the um, the coal burning power plants that are emitting these greenhouse gases are also emitting at the same time um, mercury into the environment, which is then being converted to methyl mercury and bioaccumulated, biomagnified through the food chain. But then non-directly, it is that change to the environment that is going to cause just like kind of the global climate change is causing more extremes in the weather. It's also going to cause changes in more extremes in the mercury levels of fish, and that again it has to do with the fish need to consume consume more nutrients to metabolize because they have less oxygen to as a catalyst in that metabolism due to the warming waters. So they have to eat more to survive, and and there are some that are going to not be able to eat as much, and so you're going to get the ones that went out. Survival of the fittest. Those are the ones that are going to have very high mercury levels because they're eating more fish, and then you're going to have the ones that are just barely getting along, and they're going to have lower mercury levels because they're not eating as much fish or prey, and you're going to end up with more extremes. You're going to have higher highs in your mercury levels. So there's a very direct impact, and then there's that again that kind of long-term cumulative effect that's going to cause just bigger extremes in those mercury levels.
Is the main issue coal combustion and atmospheric deposition of mercury into oceans?
Yes, definitely. I think 60 or 70% of mercury pollution is caused by coal burning power plants. That coal combustion is taking the mercury element that's contained in that coal and directly spewing that into the atmosphere, and then that rains down into the oceans and is converted to methylmercury, which is a much more toxic form of mercury, and then that is again being bioaccumulated. So it is the main issue by far.
Okay. Is there solid peer-reviewed evidence showing that climate deregulation leads to measurable increases in mercury bioaccumulation in fish?
There have been some studies in mainly Pacific Ocean predatory species, highly migratory species. I don't know those offhand, but I know that there are peer-reviewed studies. In addition to that, there are Safe Catch has conducted over 8 million mercury tests on Pacific Ocean seafood in the last 10 years. And so, having that much data shows us allows us to directly, accumulate that evidence that shows that deregulation directly leads to a measurable increase. We're seeing, and as I said, it's not an increase across the board, but it's an increase in the variability. So you're going to have much more variability within those highly migratory predatory species like tuna.
Yeah. Which species are the most vulnerable? Tuna, swordfish, or shark? Or are we talking a broader ecosystem shift?
Those are going to be your most vulnerable. Your larger predatory species, the highly migratory species. Um, there, but again, we're going to have broader, ecosystem shifts too, as those the climate, as the oceans are getting warmer, those species that traditionally thrive in cooler waters are going to get pushed further north or further south towards the poles, and it's going to have an impact on maybe the prey they're eating, their ability to repopulate. It's going to have very significant impacts. And if they're changing their patterns due to the ecosystem changes, that effect could throw off another species that was dependent on that species, and it's going to cause what used to be in perfect homeostasis to to essentially move towards more chaotic tendencies, and it's going to change shifts that are going to have significant impacts.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, I'm sure you'll know this, Kevin. Commercial fishermen are already dealing with stock shift, fuel cost, quota pressure, and market volatility. Is mercury genuinely rising in wild catch, or is this a projected future risk?
I would say across the board, there is a slight increase in your average mercury levels, but ultimately the greater threat is in the variability and the volatility of those mercury levels. You're going to have more extremes, and so that and I think it's going to be harder for companies that don't test necessarily to be able to make those broad claims because there's so much variability. It's going to be highly dependent on those companies that are doing the testing, like Safe Catch, to be able to, kind of drive awareness within the industry, as opposed to being able to fall back on kind of generalizations that they have that the industry has been using in the past.
Yeah. Are you seeing changes in mercury concentration in your own testing data over the last decade?
Yeah, yeah, we have certainly seen it. It the averages are getting higher um, as a result of just more and more mercury, which as an element doesn't. More and more of it is getting released from the essentially from the earth where it was stored before, getting released every day, and it doesn't go away. It stays in the environment because it's a heavy metal, and so it's your body will eventually um, kind of remove it from the system over a amount of time, but it's not going to leave the environment. So, and we are seeing in those 8 million tests that we've done over the last 10 years, we are seeing those mercury concentrations in our data rising um, over the course of time.
It's not something that's just appeared recently, because I was dealing with the Faroe Islands as far back as the 70s and 80s.
Mhm.
And they were at the stage where the pilot whales that they fish for, and they had a ruling, I think it was a government rule, a law, that uh, elderly elderly people and children, well, maybe it was just an advisory,
Mhm.
shouldn't eat anything like whale meat, shark, tuna,
Yes,
anything like that.
those higher at the top of the food chain, the highly predatory species. Yeah, especially if they're reliant on that as a main form of nutrients of food. If they're eating whale every day, they're certainly going to have, or certain types of seafood like that every day. They're going to certainly have elevated levels, and it's going to be at levels that are going to affect, especially those sensitive populations.
Uh-huh. The next question, you've maybe exp- explained that it's not as simple. I was going to ask you, could deregulation in one country materially affect global seafood mercury
Yeah.
levels, given that fish migration across international waters? But I think maybe from what you've said, the size of countries like yourself, India, China, well, you couldn't say one country and then put the UK as another, because it's completely different in population and size.
It is, but it all contributes. The the ocean is a big body of water, but there's currents that are moving that body of water. Those fish, um, those predatory species throughout those waters, and then again, yeah, those many of those species that are most affected by mercury levels because they're at the top of the food chain are also highly migratory. Um, so you are going to have a cumulative effect from all of those countries. It's just not one bad actor; it's the cumulative effect of everybody, unfortunately.
Uh-huh. And is, is farmed seafood affected differently than wild caught?
It is. It does. You are able to control your inputs a lot easier with farmed seafood. Obviously, you run into other potential issues, but as it pertains to mercury, yeah, you are able to control those inputs even more so in like a closed farm environment. If you're in an open water pen, farming environment, you're going to have a little less control over your inputs and over the mercury, um, especially if you don't have a clean, flow of water through those open water pens. But um, ultimately, it is affected differently because you can control the inputs easier. But it's still, if you're not consistently monitoring it, you could be unknowingly, a lot of farm fish is fed with other fish. If you're feeding them fish that have mercury in them, then you're just contributing to the same problem. More and more farms are using less and less fish in their feed, but it is still a potential problem. So you just need to be more, because you can control the inputs more. You just need to be more diligent in those inputs.
Mercury concern in seafood, well, it's not new. In your view, Kevin, is the policy shift a step change risk or incremental one?
Um, it's a hard one to answer. I would say more of a step change, but it could move more towards an incremental risk if there aren't enough good actors out there to maybe you know cause change in the right direction. Ultimately, there are companies that are concerned about this and trying to do the right thing, and if consumers, you know, show their appreciation for these companies that are doing the right thing by using their wallets, essentially voting with their wallets, then they can keep this from becoming an incremental one that ultimately can't be reversed. So um, just like global climate change, there still is time. There still is a chance for an opportunity to keep it from accelerating. But you have to have enough of the right people doing the right thing. So.
Yeah, yeah, it's good that people like yourself are on the case. Because obviously, I mean, we don't want people to be scared off. How do we avoid scaring people away from seafood, which is nutritionally one of the healthiest protein sources available?
Well, I think just like with many other things, it's all about education and awareness. Because I 100% agree. Seafood is, like you just said, one of the healthiest protein sources available. It's also, you know, um, in terms of its global footprint, is also has a much lower global footprint than or a carbon footprint than other protein sources. So it's better for people, it's better for the planet. But a big part of not necessarily that it's even bad for you, is it's the confusion, and that's what keeps people away from seafood, as much as the actual mercury levels in seafood. So a lot of people, we spend a lot of time talking to, pregnant women and people thinking about getting pregnant. And a lot of them are saying, if my doctor's telling me, while I'm pregnant, to lower my intake of seafood, um, and I listen to them while I'm pregnant, then why should I change my habits again now that I have a baby? And, so they're going to consistently stay away from this protein source, which they should be moving towards because of the benefits to the planet and to themselves. But if we told them, these are the species that you should be eating. Variability in what you're eating across, seafood is important as well, or simply testing it. If you provide the education and the awareness for these people, then they're less likely to even just be influenced by the confusion around it, and they'll move towards this protein source. So ultimately, education and awareness is one of our best tools.
That's a good. That makes a lot of sense. Very education, very much the case. Safe catch. Sorry, I'll start again. Safe catch tests seafood for mercury. Does increased regulatory uncertainties increase demand for your service?
I think so, but again, that kind of it runs in parallel with the education around and awareness throughout of the problem throughout the entire industry. I think when people learn more, they're more likely to spend a little bit more to, to well, a to protect themselves, but also to show that this is something that's important to them. And so yes, it is increasing demand for our services, but also on the flip side gives us more of an opportunity to have the power to make a difference on the industry side and on environmental change, and showing that companies that are doing the right thing um, are being rewarded for doing the right thing.
Yeah. How do you ensure that this isn't seen as benefiting commercially from environmental deregulation?
Um, I mean, I think that continuing to be transparent about the reasons we're doing it, um, and and you know showing people that we're not just focused on Mercury too. As a company, we're also focused on we're plastic neutral. We pay for every ounce of plastic that we use in our supply chain. We pay to have that same amount of plastic taken out or removed from the oceans. And so it goes beyond just focusing on one thing. We're trying to increase awareness, bring more protein, that healthy protein to more people, make it more available to more groups. And if we're transparent and honest, I think people will see that and see that it's not just a money grab. It's we're genuinely trying to help consumers.
Oh, well, no, Kevin, we're taking a whole new dimension. We're talking about politicians, and now you're talking about honest. They don't go.
This is true. Not often mentioned in the same sentence.
I find it quite strange how how one party in government can make such a change from another on something that's not directly political.
True, and oftentimes done in you know a form of not necessarily saying it's political.
Those guys can come in here. Good.
Yeah, 5 minutes.
Yeah. We don't need now.
Oh, yeah. Sorry about that, Jim.
It's okay.
Start again. Sorry, what was the question I was answering there? I think we were just commenting.
Yeah, just on. I just asked. Yeah, would it? I thought it was strange that one
Oh,
party in
yeah.
government after the other, and they would change something like this, which isn't directly involved in politics.
And they don't directly say that it's a political reason either. They're saying it's because we want to help business, we want to help the industry, but at the same time they're saying this, they're directly impacting it in a negative way and even a worse way. So I agree with you. It's really kind of ridiculous. But
If emissions rise, how long would it realistically take before we detect higher mercury levels in fish?
I mean, realistically, we're seeing those increases today. So there isn't a large lag in these increase in emissions, the bioaccumulation or biomagnification can happen relatively quickly. And again, this isn't, heavy mercury isn't an element that, is also deteriorating at the same time it's being generated and put into the earth. It's just being generated. It's not deteriorating. So it's going to accumulate. It's just going to accumulate a little bit faster. And so we are seeing it right now.
Okay. And what should fishermen, processors, and retailers actually be doing differently right now, if anything?
Just again, really trying to educate, being transparent, and taking the time to, which the seafood industry has always been good about, I would say, of showing an interest in the long-term future. They recognize if you take all the fish out of the ocean, you're not going to have a business in 10 years. So they've done a pretty good job of banding together and managing stocks well. That wasn't always the case, obviously, but they've done a much better job recently. And so just taking that a step further, and instead of focusing just on the health of the stocks, but also the health of their consumers, I think that they'll really be able to see the benefits in the long term, just like we did see the benefits of focusing on management of those stocks.
Kevin, could I ask you back to what I mentioned with the Faroe Islands when I was dealing with them, and they took that in for elderly and children were advised not to eat some of that fish with the mercury content. But they felt that it was a bit. They were the victims because they thought it would be interesting if they were right. They felt for such a small island, small country, they reckoned it was coming from all the pollution that everybody else was putting into the sea, and they were suffering for it.
Yeah.
Would you agree with that?
Unfortunately, yeah. It's I mean, that's how the impacts of something like 1,000 miles away in the U.S. can have an impact on this small island in the northern seas, where because there's so much interconnectedness, especially when it comes to the ocean. So unfortunately, yeah, they are, because of what we're doing over here in the U.S., directly impacted. As a small island nation, they are directly impacted, and it's not fair. But that's they can hopefully join the fight and of increasing awareness and just trying to ensure that enough awareness of the problem gets out there so that enough people can push for change with their wallets.
Okay, yeah, indeed. If you were advising policymakers, what would be the one evidence-based action you'd prioritize? Optional, closer, strong.
I'd focus. Yeah,
Sorry.
I would focus on the industry. I would focus on the we could obviously provide the evidence of the mercury levels increasing, but also you just look at the industry and how seafood stocks, although like I mentioned previously, they are well managed from a biology standpoint. You can't we're seeing like the sardine industry off of Western Africa is highly depleted right now. We sell sardines as a company. We can't get sardines right now that are big enough to do boneless, skinless because the industry is collapsing. And so I think just real evidence on how these things are affecting the industry on a large scale economically is the way to get their attention ultimately.
Uh-huh. Yeah. Is this repeal likely to have a measurable impact on the seafood on our plates within the next 10 years?
Yes, it will. And, you know, unless I don't, certainly this administration is not going to make any changes, but there is still an opportunity for consumers to affect, how this is gonna play out. So while there is going to be a measurable impact, we as consumers can, by using our wallets to reward the companies that are doing what's right, can slow the process and again make a measurable impact in a positive direction. So,
Without putting you on the spot, would you eat tuna just now?
how do you safeguard tuna? Tested tuna.
Of course, yeah. All right. You can,
um,
yeah,
and
sorry.
still, I'm an adult. If you ask me, would I feed it to my kids? It might be a different answer. I mean, I obviously would feed them tested seafood, but when I'm fortunate enough to be able to take my kids to Hawaii once a year, and my kids, every time we go to a restaurant, my youngest kid wants to order the grilled fish, and I ask them, unfortunately, a lot of the time it's swordfish or marlin or these species that I know are high in mercury, and I have to be like, well, let's go for the chicken today. As much as I would like him to have seafood, it doesn't affect me as much, but knowing that he's a smaller body, he's a developing mind, I gotta be a little bit more careful about what I'm allowing him to put in his body. So.
That's the very reason I thought it'd be interesting to ask you, because somebody who's so up to date and on it, and you know so much about it. What's your own views on it? So really, it's something we need to be thinking about now, rather than think, oh, it'll be okay until another deregulation or something.
Exactly. Yes. Yes. I 100% agree.
Yeah, yeah. Have you a social media presence, Kevin?
Yeah. Yeah.
Can our listeners follow you online?
I mean, as my company, Safe Catch, has a big presence. I don't personally, but yeah, on Instagram, um, Facebook, we're getting a little bit more active on YouTube um, and TikTok. But yeah, safecatch.com will take you to any one of those social media channels. But on all those social media channels, just mostly at SafeCatch, we'll take you to the right place where you can get information on what we're doing to really fight the good fight ultimately.
Yeah, and not mentioned, but just come into my mind. Is shellfish come into this? Do you find they're affected?
They are. It's on a smaller scale, but shellfish do get affected, and again, that they are a little bit more heavily impacted directly by the environment they're in, um, because I mean they are lower on the food chain, so they have less of an opportunity to biomagnify, but they are affected, and we have seen certain areas, unfortunately, you know, like shellfish that are in areas that have had industrial pollution directly affecting those waters, we do see higher mercury levels. And so, again, it's on a smaller scale, but it can it can be impacted a little bit more directly because it's lower on the food chain. It's it's just going to be more directly impacted. So, short answer, yes.
Do you ever try anything? I've done a recent podcast with a guy in China, and they had heavily polluted waters after the war, and there was some like a paper mill or that, and what they used to clean all the bacteria and the toxins and that was oysters.
Yeah, yeah, and there's a lot of cases of nature does a good job of helping itself out when allowed to do it, and when not completely overwhelmed. I have heard of that. Oysters are a great filter. Um, so there's a project in our backyard where they're doing in the San Francisco Bay, where they're trying to repopulate the oyster populations because of their filtering and their positive environmental impact. Yeah.
Oh, there's hope for us yet.
Yes.
Well, I'll just say thank you and let you get on with your day. Thank you very much, Kevin.
Thank you, Jim.